All right, so today we're talking about carbohydrates. So get ready to learn. This is a little bit more informative than the last presentation. So if there's anything you don't understand or you're confused about, there's a lot of more detailed info in the last presentation we did. But this one I really wanted to focus on just carbohydrates because there's so many misconceptions about them, and we'll kind of get through a little bit of that. So. Is butter a carb? One of my favorite memes from Mean Girls. So the first thing I wanted to do is kind of review these foods, and let me get rid of this. So I don't know if you guys know what foods classify as carbohydrates, but I kind of wanted to go over these. So for example, butter is actually a fat. Beans are a complex carbohydrate. Juice or fruit, oranges, those are carbohydrates. We've got chicken there to the right, that is a protein. Right below there we've got oats, those are a complex carbohydrate. Broccoli, that is actually a carbohydrate, believe it or not. All vegetables are. Whole grain bread, that's also a carbohydrate. Bananas, a fruit, it's also a carbohydrate. Potato chips, those are also a carbohydrate, and milk is also a carbohydrate. So the reason why I wanted to go over these is because a lot of people tell me they're cutting carbohydrates out of their diet or they're getting rid of them, and I'm like, and then they tell me they're eating all this broccoli or all these fruits, and I'm like, well, you know, those are carbohydrates too. So, you know, they're not all bad is what I kind of wanted to get across. I think they definitely get a bad rap. So before I get into just carbohydrates specifically, real quick, I just wanted to kind of review what is a macronutrient. So there are 3 macronutrients, and these are the building blocks of all food. So everything we eat are made up of these 3 things: fats, protein, and carbohydrates. So fats are things like butter, oils, avocados, eggs, nuts, nut butters. And they are essential. So without them, we wouldn't be able to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, K. Those are our fat-soluble vitamins. They help us store energy. They insulate our cells in our bodies. They're really important in hormone function and uphold your cell membranes. Protein, obviously, the building blocks are amino acids. So this goes right down to our nucleic acid and our DNA, what makes up the building blocks of all of our cells. Really important for our immune system, muscle contraction and building, skin and bones, all that good stuff. And then last but not least, of course, carbohydrates, which technically are the only macronutrient that we don't necessarily have to obtain from our diet. So these are made up of sugars. So you'll hear me say glucose a lot. That's what carbohydrates break down into in your body. And they provide energy and conserve protein for our tissues, prime fat metabolism, and are our brain food. So the most important function that carbohydrates serve is that it's what our brains function off of. So that's what they need to function and run optimally. So while it is a required molecule for life, your body can produce it from non-carbohydrate foods when we don't have it in the diet. So I'm sure everyone's heard about the keto diet, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on, but we can actually produce glucose on our own without physically eating it. So this is the USDA recommendations for what your macronutrient split should be. So how much of each macronutrient you should get. So for carbohydrates, 45 to 65% of your diet, protein 10 to 35, and fat 20 to 35. And what kind of changes this split is based on your activity levels. You know, if you're someone who's highly active, you know, you're probably going to want to be eating 60% of your calories from carbohydrates because you're using those, you need them. And if you're someone who's not very active, especially like with high intensity exercise, you're doing a lot more like weight training or walking, this is going to be you're going to want to aim for the lower end of the range, so like 45% of your calories from carbohydrates. So to quantify that to a number, if you're on an 1,800 calorie diet, believe it or not, that'd be 200 grams of carbohydrates daily. And the RDA, so the recommended minimum for adults is typically 135 grams. But this is obviously different. If you have diabetes, you want to stay below 200 grams, and pregnant women should be getting at least 175 grams daily. So we talked about this chart over here to the right at our last presentation. But this is just really interesting because this is how each of those different macronutrients affects your blood sugar. So as you can see, obviously carbohydrates spike it the most. Proteins have a more moderate spike. So proteins can be broken down into sugar. And then fat, of course, keeps your blood sugar stable and doesn't affect it in the same way that those other two do. So a lot of people talk about good carbohydrates versus bad carbohydrates. And, you know, those terms came from the words simple and complex carbohydrates. And where these words are really rooted is actually in their cellular structure. So simple carbohydrates are just single molecules, whereas complex carbohydrates have multiple chains. So on the left here we have, or I guess that might, yeah, on the left here we have single molecules, and the right we have these chains. And why this matters or is important to you at all is simply because of the way it allows our body to break them down. So simple carbohydrates, since they're only one molecule, our body breaks them down very quickly. Whereas complex carbohydrates, they have that more complex structure, so it takes a little bit more effort for our body to break them down. And this does make some differences in how your body absorbs them and how it affects your body. So the simple carbohydrates, you know, those are the things that really just spike your blood sugar very quickly. So we're thinking about like sugary beverages, you know, like white bread, cookies, like pastries, that type of stuff. They're very easily digested by your body. So there's not much slowing it down. It breaks it down really quickly, causes that instant spike in blood sugar and subsequent insulin release and stabilization of the blood sugar. They do not provide long-term energy because, like I just said, they're broken down so quickly, it's a spike and a crash. And they leave you craving more. We talked about this in our last presentation, how they affect cravings. Insulin, as it's released, does increase those cravings. And they're generally found in processed or refined foods, but that's not the only place they're found. There are some healthy foods that do have refined carbohydrates, you know, like even like honey, for example. So you can have refined sugar or you can have honey. Either way, they're both still simple carbohydrates. Would I prefer you guys get your sugar from honey? Absolutely, because it's a less processed, more natural way to obtain that. But either way, they are both still simple carbohydrates. And then complex carbohydrates. So when you think of these, like think about your wheat bread. Think about like just the texture of it. Think about how it's like, you know, it's not soft. It's got more cell structure to it. That's the fiber in there. So complex carbohydrates, or what someone might say the good carbohydrates, these are the fibers and the starches. They provide you with more longer lasting energy. So rather than instant breakdown of that food and a spike, your blood sugar crash, low energy, these provide more of a modest curve in your blood sugar. So these are found in more nutrient dense foods. And how to know what that is, just think about foods in their most natural form. Think about a banana. It's not changed in any way. It's simply a banana. Think about your sweet potato. It hasn't been changed or processed anyway. It's just a sweet potato. So these are typically found in foods that are more natural, in a more natural form. And yeah, they provide more sustained energy, like I was saying, just because your body has to work harder to break them down. So, you know, just think about like if you were to eat an orange, first drinking a glass of orange juice. If I was to try and eat 10 oranges, that would be exhausting. First off, like the mechanical chewing of 10 oranges. I don't even want to get into the peeling part, but that has nothing to do with it. And the fiber in there is so rich and filling that you physically just wouldn't want to eat 10 oranges all at once. But to chug down 10 glasses of orange juice, lower in fiber, less mechanical chewing, not that hard to do. And that has to do with the fiber that's in there. And that's also why fiber can help you lose weight, is because it's so filling while maintaining being low calorie. So, you know, a lot of carbohydrates get a bad rap because of these simple carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates in your diet can make you lose weight. They will provide you feelings of fullness and sustain energy and can make you feel really good. It's just a matter of choosing those complex carbohydrates more so than the simple. But, you know, there is a room for everything in your diet. So as I was comparing those simple and complex, this is kind of the curve I was talking about. So simple carbohydrates give that spike, as you can see in that upper curve, and more complex carbohydrates give less of a spike. So this is showing your blood sugar after consumption of these types of foods. And this is just a little bit of the effects on your body. So, you know, this, you might feel this like in the middle of the day, you just had lunch and you're feeling really tired. This is what's happening. As you have that sugar spike from your meal and it crashes, you're having fatigue, you're having a stress response, and you're going to have hunger again from that natural response in your body. So to prevent this, choosing those complex carbohydrates, keeping that blood sugar a little bit more stable, is going to help. And fiber. This is a really wordy slide, but I just love fiber, so I had to get it all out there for you. But so 25 grams daily for women, 30 for men is the recommendation for health. And fiber is so good for your gut health. It's amazing for you. So you guys know I'm all about that. So make sure you get fiber. If you listen to nothing else I say today, make sure you're getting as much fiber as you possibly can in your diet. We'll talk a little bit more about those benefits in a second. But so fiber, this is what a complex carbohydrate is made up of, like I was saying. And it actually isn't digested. It just passes right through you. And it doesn't provide any calories. So that's the other benefit of it. And that's why the fiber in your diet can help you lose weight, is because you're eating something that makes you feel full, but it's not providing you with calories. So that's awesome. And that's why so many of the highly processed, like simple carbohydrates, are so high calorie, and you continue to eat and eat and eat them. Think about like a bag of potato chips. You know, you can eat a whole bag of potato chips that might be like 1,000 calories and be like, oh, I'm not that full. But, you know, these high fiber foods, not the case, right? That fiber makes you feel really full. So there's two types of fiber. And, you know, you don't really need to know this besides for the fact that it's kind of interesting. And I get questions about these a lot, so I thought I would include it. So there's soluble and insoluble fiber. One's not necessarily better than the other. They're both really good for you. And a lot of them are both found in a lot of foods. So soluble fiber actually forms a gel in your digestive tract when it's consumed. And it lines that tract and prevents the absorption of fats and cholesterol. So oatmeal is an example of a soluble fiber. You might have your doctor tell you to eat more oatmeal if you have high cholesterol, and this is why. Essentially, it's binding those cholesterols and pushing them out of your body instead of absorbing and digesting them. And they also feed your gut bacteria, so for that gut health, like we talked about. So the insoluble fiber, these are the ones that they don't break down, they just pass right through you. So they prevent constipation, and they kind of bind to everything else passing through and allow that to move through your digestive tract. So it speeds everything up, prevents blockage, and reduced bowel movements, which is very common as you get older. When I worked in long-term care, pretty much every person over the age of 60 was on a laxative. And this is a huge reason why, not getting enough fiber. Obviously, everything slows down as you get older, but this plays a major role in it. So lowers risk of diverticular disease, reduces the outpourings in your colon, which could cause that, and then also reduces the risk of colorectal colorectal cancer. We don't know a lot about this yet, but a lot of it is linked to that positive gut health. It's a very mysterious place down there. We don't know all the stuff that there is to know yet, but we know that this is very, very, very good for you. These are some examples of foods that are high in fiber. I just kind of threw these on here. Just be aware, because I think it's kind of hard to know. So beans, peas, artichokes, like whole grain foods, sweet potatoes. If you are going to eat a potato, always make sure that you eat the skin. That's where the fiber is. That's the good stuff. So scrub it real good and eat that skin up. That's where all those nutrients are. And same with apples. All right, so I'm going to go through the digestion and absorption process of carbohydrates. So I'm going to try to go about this slowly because it's kind of confusing. But it all starts in your mouth. So believe it or not, some carbohydrates start their digestion in your mouth, and they're processed by your liver and stored as glycogen once moved through the small intestine. Oops, someone messaged me. Sure. So they're processed through the small intestine, and your liver deals with them first, and they're formed into glycogen, which is like a package that they store carbohydrates in. So this is stored in your liver to be used in case of starvation or high intensity exercise or whatever else. Whatever else that we don't have room for in our liver, it gets pushed back out to the bloodstream, okay? So that's where you've got all these carbohydrates floating around in your blood. This is when insulin is released. Now, if you're diabetic, either you don't have enough insulin being produced, or it's not as effective in removing this sugar from your blood. So what happens is, first it's sent to your muscle cells to be used for exercise. And if your muscle cells are full, your liver's full, this is when it's filtered into your fat cells. So basically everyone else is at max capacity. We're going to store it in our fat cells. So the reason why our body does this is because that caveman inside of us, he doesn't know that we've got plenty of food on the shelves at the grocery store. He thinks, you know, I got to store this up for a rainy day in case I'm attacked or I'm starving or whatever the case. So unfortunately, that caveman is still alive and well in all of us, and he wants to store our carbohydrates, excess carbohydrates, as fat. How to prevent this from happening? Eating carbohydrates in moderation, not overeating your carbohydrates. And as we talked about, some people just are less efficient at this. And it's not your fault. It's not anyone's fault. It just is a matter of managing that intake a little bit more diligently. And what a lot of people don't know is that when they are stored as fat, that's actually when a triglyceride is formed. So if you go to your doctor and he tells you that you have high triglycerides, this is what's happening. So those are formed from excess carbohydrates, okay? And these do increase your risk for heart disease. So something to be aware of. If you want to reduce your triglycerides, paying attention to your carbohydrate intake is a great place to look. And this is something that's also genetic. But once again, your genetics do not define your future. These can be obviously controlled by diet. All right, and I just wanted to touch on how this relates back to exercise. So once your body normalizes your blood sugar using something called glucagon, so your body's back to normal, when you start exercising, this is when those stored carbohydrates are released, okay? And if you look at this chart on the left, this is actually pretty interesting. This is the difference between when you use carbohydrates during exercise or stored fat. So a lot of people are like, why am I burning fat doing this? Why am I burning carbohydrates doing this? This is it. So your body can very easily access those carbohydrates floating around in your blood, right? They're just floating around, ready to be used. So when you're doing high intensity exercise, that's what your body wants to use. It's easy to access. So that's when those are going to be used up. And that's, if you're someone who has high blood sugar, a great way to lower your blood sugar. And you'll see as you're doing lower intensity exercise, so where you're in your warm up or the low to moderate, you have more use of fat. And that is because fat, it takes a little bit longer to access, but is preferential in that lower intensity exercise. So if you want to burn more fat, low intensity exercise, weightlifting, walking, that type of thing. You want to burn more carbohydrates, keep your blood sugar low, prevent the storage of carbohydrates, so therefore less fat storage as well. Higher intensity exercise is the way to go. And, you know, if we're eating very low carbohydrate, it's important to know that those carbohydrates provide 6% more energy than fats do. So it's easier for your body to access it. It's easier for your body to use. This is why it's very important for athletes to make sure they're getting enough carbohydrates. And I thought this was interesting. So your muscles typically have enough of that stored glycogen. So what we said that the carbohydrates are packaged into the last 90 minutes of exercise. So this video, I actually saw this for the first time when I was in my undergrad, and I thought it was really interesting. Turn this down. So if you do not get enough carbohydrates, which you'll see happen to this guy. So marathon runners, they supplement their carbohydrates using like glucose tablets and stuff like that. This is what happens if you actually don't get enough glucose and continue, or glycogen stored in your muscles and continue to try to exercise. This man's legs are completely going out on him. And that's because he doesn't have enough glucose. So his muscles can physically no longer function. So eventually he gets to the finish line. But yeah, it's just kind of crazy how you don't think about how these foods or these things affect your body. But in a marathon runner, it's kind of sped up the process of that starvation. So you can see him crawling to the finish line because he did not have enough carbohydrates. Really interesting. So why count carbohydrates? We touched on this in the last presentation, but they have the greatest impact on your blood sugar levels. So if you're diabetic, absolutely, I 100% highly recommend that you count your carbohydrates. If you are pre-diabetic or at risk due to family history, I would say you don't have to count them, but it would be helpful. And this prevents less high highs and less low lows. So your blood sugar is going to fluctuate less. You're going to feel better. There's no off-limit foods, technically speaking, because you have your allotted amount of carbohydrates. Technically, if you want to have, you know, a lollipop or whatever, that still does fit in there. But having more fiber is easier to fit in. But so flexibility. So overall, better blood glucose control and A1C. So this chart to the right here talks about how 1 serving of carbohydrates affects 1 gram of carbohydrates raises your blood sugar. And 1 serving of carbohydrates is considered 15 grams, okay? So typically this is what you should be having with a meal, is 15 gram servings. This is interesting. Based on your weight, you can look at this and see how much a serving of carbohydrates would raise your blood sugar. So calculate this out. 1 serving, 15 grams of carbohydrates would raise, you know, someone in the 161 to 220 pound range, their blood sugar would raise 45 milligrams per deciliter. So to put that into perspective, you know, typically we're usually floating around 90 to 100 milligrams per deciliter at our resting blood glucose. So that would already be putting us at, you know, 145 with just a 15 gram serving, a half cup of oatmeal or a half cup of rice. So if we're eating more than that, that's greatly going to spike our blood sugars. This is another way to track. And this is simply using your hands. So you don't want to measure. This is another method you can use. So if you cup your hand, that's 1 serving of carbohydrates. So that 15 grams that I talked about. And this goes the same with like your other macronutrients too. So a serving of fats is the tip of your thumb, protein, your palm. So this just gives you a good general idea of how to build your plate. And I wanted to give you an idea of what 15 grams of some different foods looks like. So a slice of toast, a third cup of rice, a fourth bagel or muffin, half cup pasta. So these are those 15 gram serving sizes. And same with fruit. A little fun rule of thumb, if you have grapes or cherries, each grape is 1 gram of carbohydrate, each cherry is 1 gram of carbohydrate. So it makes it a little easier for you to count. Doesn't that look like such a beautiful fruit salad? It's making me hungry. And this is for milk, so 1 cup. And the foods with very little carbohydrates that you can eat lots and lots of course, is vegetables. We talked about the plate method in the last presentation. Half of your plate, ideally, can be vegetables. And the beauty of that is that they're filling from the fiber. You can bulk up on them, and they're no calories. And you can make them taste delicious if you cook them whatever. I mean, I love roasting my vegetables. I know a lot of people like boiling them, sauteing them in a stir fry, whatever the heck you want. Grill them this time of year. But yeah, they're great foods to do. And then there are some vegetables that contain carbs like carrots and acorn squash and peas. So reading labels, this is so important, especially if you are watching your blood sugar and paying attention to portion sizes. So, the pro to this is that it's pretty easy once you get it down. Con, there's no label on fresh foods, but that's okay because we have the power of the Google these days, and you can just search it up real quick, no problem. And it's important to be aware of the portion sizes and the way you read it. So, for example, this is a 70 calorie per serving food. So that's 70 calories for a half cup for this food item. So if you were to have a cup, you double that. So it would be 140 calories for your serving. Okay. Now I wanted to teach you guys about net carb, because this is a beautiful thing, especially if you're diabetic, because it essentially makes you feel like you can have more carbohydrates. So for example, this food right here has 13 total grams of carbohydrate, but because, like we talked about, your body does not absorb fiber. So you could subtract the fiber, and sugar alcohols are not absorbed either. So you can also subtract the sugar alcohols. So 13 grams of carbohydrate minus 3 fiber minus 6 sugar alcohol is 4 net carbs. So this is a beautiful thing, because rather than thinking you're having a whole serving of carbohydrates just about here, 13 grams, you're actually only having 4, because that's all your body's absorbing. Your body doesn't absorb that fiber. So that's another benefit of those high fiber foods. You got a lot more bang for your buck. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? And something else that's really, so this is a new thing where it says sugars separately in here. Actually, it will begin, the food label should say added sugars within the next year. And the beauty of that is that a lot of foods naturally contain sugar. So you think about carrots or milk, those foods contain natural sugar. It's not added sugar. So in the future, we're going to be able to, it's going to be a little bit easier, because I know reading these can get confusing, because there's more than, I've seen so many charts of this, there's more than 75 different names for sugar. There's probably over 100 now. And they just try to trick you. They write it down as everything, anything. Like I'll see like cane sugar or pure cane syrup, like they're trying to make it sound fancy so you think it's more natural or something like that. It's all the same. All these are the same. So this item particularly, we can see that it's 8 grams of carbohydrates, 3 grams of fiber. So this would be a 5 net carb food, 36 calories. This is carrots. So these little baby carrots do have 5 grams of sugar in them, but they do have fiber. And there's something to be said for that because like we talked about earlier, it's not going to absorb as quickly. So the difference between this and perhaps, we'll do that in a minute, and perhaps this food, this has 11 grams of carbohydrate, 5 sugar, 0 fiber. This is going to cause a much greater spike in your blood sugar than the carrots. And this is like a Pop-Tart crisp thing. But the point is that fiber is important in the absorption. And so this one, a little quiz for you here. If you were to have 2 servings of this food, how many grams of carbohydrates would that be? The answer would be 16 grams of carbohydrates if you were going to have 2 servings. So you multiply that by 2, or if you're having 3, multiply it by 3, however many you're having. But if we want to find the net carbohydrate, like we just talked about on that previous slide, so this would be 5 net carb. So for 2 servings, that would be 10 net carb. So pretty cool little trick to keep in mind when you're counting your carbohydrates and calculating that into your blood sugar. And I wanted to talk about MyFitnessPal. So this is an amazing resource for anyone on a health or wellness journey who just wants to be more aware of what they're taking in. I'm not someone that ever recommends that you track like every little food you put in. That just is exhausting. But if you don't know a lot about food, you don't know what you're putting in, you don't know where you're at, you don't know what type of nutrients you're taking in, this is a great way to kind of discover this. So it's basically like a food journal, but it's on your phone. And in this app, so there's different ones. There's MyFitnessPal, there's the Spark 360 app, there's the Lose It app. In this app, you can log your foods. And the beauty of it too is that it even has like a little scanner, so you can scan the box of, say, your cereal in the morning and enter in your portion size, and will log what you have for the day. So as you can see on the right here, there's a little chart, and it tells you how many carbohydrates you've had, how many proteins throughout your day. And you can use that to gauge your goals. So if you're someone who's trying to be a little bit more diligent of your numbers, want to get a little bit better blood sugar control, I would say this is absolutely the easiest way to track accurately. Okay, so I mean, any brand food you can think of, and that's also why I recommend this app, MyFitnessPal. They literally have every brand you can think of. If you go to Panera Bread or Dunkin' Donuts or whatever, all those companies, all that food's going to be on there. You can just type in the name and it will enter right in there all the nutrition information. So super convenient, gotta love it. Great technology helping us manage our blood sugar. I did want to touch on the keto or low carb diets because I get so many questions about this, and I wanted to keep this as neutral as possible. Pros and cons. The keto diet, a lot of people do lose a lot of weight on it, and a lot of that is due to water. So carbohydrates bind to water in your body. So if you cut carbohydrates out completely, you're going to have a huge amount of water loss initially, and eventually, yes, fat loss. So this is going to decrease your insulin and glucose levels. It was initially developed for seizure reduction in epileptic patients. And some research suggests that the ketogenic might speed muscle recovery, boost fat burning, and enhance endurance. Main thing to be aware of with this is that it's not the best diet to be on if you're trying to exercise. So if you were to want to do a keto or very low carb diet, you want to stick to more low intensity exercise. So like we talked about in that slide dealing with exercise, how your body uses carbohydrates for the higher intensity exercise. Well, if you don't have any carbohydrates, you're burning ketones. So you want to stick to lower intensity exercise, or you're going to be feeling real sluggish. You're not going to want to pick your legs up. It's going to be tough. So that's my 2 cents there with the pros. Cons. I typically do not recommend any type of diet that's highly restrictive. It's not sustainable. It's going to break down your self-confidence in yourself, right? Because if you can't sustain something, that makes you not feel so good, right? So we don't want to highly restrict anyone. We want to be able to fit all those foods in. So that's the difficult thing with the keto diet. It's not something that you should ever do long term. It's temporary. So even with those benefits being said, that is temporary. You know, you could do it for a couple months, lose the weight, and then transition into a more moderate carb diet. So research suggests it can lead to a decline in cognitive performance and mood, perceptions of fatigue, and lack of focus. And this is because it is your brain food. Carbohydrates and glucose are food for your brain. So without them, that's going to make it a little bit harder for you to think clearly. So the recommendation for minimum intake is 105 to 125 grams a day for brain function. Okay. And the other thing to be aware of is that if you do the keto diet or a low carb diet or what's called lazy keto, when you're switching in and out of ketosis, you're kind of like flipping a switch in your body and you kind of get that keto flu. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. You just don't feel well. So if you're someone who is doing keto, you need to do it properly, I guess is the best way I can say it. Like you need to be tracking your carbohydrates, making sure you're staying at least below 40 grams a day. Otherwise, you're going to be flipping that switch in and out and feeling like crap, basically. So it's like one or the other. You can't do lazy keto. That's not going to work. Yeah, it decreases your risk of healing, dehydration, constipation. So those are just some of the, and also, you know, you're going to have nutrient deficiencies. So what I would recommend over this low carb, highly restrictive diet is a more moderate carbohydrate diet, you know, 100 grams a day, 125 grams a day, something like that. You can't give a number based on anyone or generalize. Everyone's body's different, but I can always calculate that out for you based on your height and weight and all that good stuff. And the long-term safety is unknown of the keto diet. So it's still very preliminary research. We don't know everything about it. So that's just something to be aware of. So benefits of carbohydrates: energy, your main source of energy. You want to fuel a workout, carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates are the way to go. Brain health, like we touched on, this is your brain's main source of fuel. They're nutrient dense, so those fruits, those vegetables, they're so high in vitamins and they're anti-inflammatory and they feed your gut, so they're so good for you. They help you with exercise and recovery, and those complex carbohydrates are great for you. So hopefully we've been able to bust some of these myths with everything we've talked about thus far. So for example, only bread, pasta, and potatoes are considered carbs. No, not true. As we talked about, fruits and vegetables, very healthy foods, milk and dairy, those are all carbs. It's not just bread and pasta. Are all carbs unhealthy for you? Absolutely not. Plenty of healthy foods, like I touched on, fruits and vegetables are great for you. No carbs after dark. Absolutely not true. So you guys, we went over how your body absorbs carbohydrates. It has nothing to do with time of day. 9 a.m., 9 p.m., your body's going to store them as fat if it has excess. That's all there is to it. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. Carbs make you put on weight. Just like any other macronutrient, you eat excess of it, then you store it as fat. Same goes for protein, same goes for fats. You will feel sluggish after eating carbs. Only if you're eating too much or those simple carbohydrates that cause those spikes. So it depends on what kind you're eating. Don't eat carbs before exercise. False. You do want to eat carbs before exercise. They actually, a good like 15-gram serving before exercise is great to maintain your blood sugar, especially for my diabetics. And gives you a little bit of energy boost. And actually, within the hour following exercise is the best time to eat carbohydrates as well, so that your body does not break down muscles. Okay. And then all carbs are the same. I hope that you know this isn't true. They are not all the same. We went over the simple, the complex, and the high fiber, no fiber, that type of deal. So they're not all the same. So that, oh, and we have a little quiz. I almost forgot. All right, so foods that are low in fat are often high in, the answer is carbohydrates. So if you see a label that says low fat or any type of that type of stuff, low fat, low calorie, all that stuff, beware. Beware. If it's marketing anything to you, like heart healthy, like Cheerios is heart healthy. Cheerios, I could think of 100 other foods that are better for your heart than Cheerios, okay? I mean, think about all those amazing fruits and vegetables out there. I would not pick Cheerios over them personally, but you don't see the apple with that label on it, you know? So anything that says that, typically they replace the fat with carbohydrates or sugars, okay, to make it taste better. So just something to be aware of. You guys know how to read your labels now, so you can kind of dive into that and see for yourself. What hormone is released when blood glucose is elevated? So when you, after you eat your meal and your blood sugar rises, this shoot, I just gave it away. This hormone puts out that fire and normalizes your blood sugar, and that is insulin. How can high carbohydrate diets contribute to heart disease? So we talked about this a little bit when we discussed the breakdown pathway. Carbohydrates increase triglycerides in the blood. So excess carbohydrates turned into triglycerides. Triglycerides contribute to heart disease. So something to be aware of. And which of the following is a negative consequence of a low carbohydrate diet? This would be loss of protein sparing mechanism. So when you eat a very low carbohydrate diet, the first thing your body is going to eat away at is your muscle, because it is non-essential. Fat, we need that for starvation. Muscle, not essential. So that's where your body's going to go. So you're going to eat away at your protein stores and muscles. Oh, I think that's it. Yep, that's it. The end. Let me screen. All right, does anyone have any questions? Let me unmute. Any questions?
Kaitlyn, how do you feel about those sugar alcohols? I'm on the fence with them. I see some of these breakfast bars that have a lot of sugar alcohol to sweeten them up, and they say that they don't count, but I feel like everything has to count somewhere, right?
Yeah, well, the main thing with those is that they can cause some GI distress, so like some digestive discomfort. They do pass right through. I think that a lot of companies kind of like amp those up in a sense to make the label look better. So I'm going to talk about the fake sugars more in the next presentation, but I would say I always recommend going as natural as possible. So, you know, in moderation. It's not something I would want to eat all day, every day. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like trying to put my video back on myself, but I like don't know how. I don't know. Oh wait, maybe this will work. Oh, were you able to see me that whole time? That's funny. Okay. Olivia asked, what about products that are non-dairy? Is it bad to consume too much, such as almond milk, etc.? Okay, well, so dairy products contain more carbohydrates naturally, natural sugars. They also have their benefits of the vitamins and minerals and phosphorus that's in milk. Non-dairy, I would never say it's bad to consume too much because non-dairy tend to be pretty low carbohydrate, low sugar. Make sure you get the no added sugar kind though, because there will be the no sugar and the high sugar. That's usually like 12 grams of sugar per serving. So obviously get the unsweetened almond milk. Ideally get one that's fortified with vitamins. But otherwise, yeah, nothing bad about consuming too much almond milk or non-dairy milks. So nothing to worry about there. Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. The next week, we're going to talk more about diabetes. I'm going to dive into the artificial sweeteners. I wanted to get that on this presentation, but I didn't want it to be too long, and that was kind of unrelated. So talk about the artificial sweeteners, if you should be using those, and a little bit more about diabetes.